There are many dreadful politicians in the world right now. They're all keen on ever greater state control and increasingly draconian limitations on freedom, all while advertising themselves as virtuous champions of decency, democracy, and the people. But of all this recent strain of smarmy totalitarians, the worst is probably Justin Trudeau. Because if anyone epitomises the smug idiocies of our modern elite, it's the vain, ridiculous tyrant who rules over Canada. And I don't use the word tyrant lightly. Trudeau is an ideological bedfellow of New Zealand's hideous Jacinda Ardern, a politician who presents himself as a smiley, touchy-feely nice guy, but who's really a black-hearted despot with the controlling instincts of the vilest totalitarians in history. This is the man who prostrated himself before the terrorist organisation of BLM, overtly breaking rules on lockdown and social distancing to do so, but who then responded like a Bond villain when the peaceful protesters of the truckers' movement did exactly the same thing. This was the pivotal moment of Trudeau's reign, the one where he really showed what he was made of. Just as with BLM, he brainlessly followed the accepted shibboleths of the day, insisting on face masks, social distancing, and the vaccine, when all had been emphatically proved to do next to nothing to stop the spread. But reality and empirical science matter nothing to people like Trudeau, for all his protestations to the contrary. It's all about putting on a show, conforming to the diktats of his illiberal tribe, and focusing on how people feel. Unless it's his political opposition, of course. Like all the great brutes of history, he doesn't give a damn how they feel. So Trudeau closed Parliament, arbitrarily invoked emergency laws designed only for wartime. He sent in the cavalry to trample on elderly disabled women, used his stormtroopers to break up the peaceful rally, hurled everyone he could in jail, froze all their bank accounts, stole the proceeds of charitable contributions, and justified all of it on lies, slandering the truckers as Nazis, fascists, misogynists, homophobes, and every other ism in his little cult miserable lexicon. And all of this had followed the unjustifiable mandates and restrictions on freedom that he had imposed. When his tyranny was challenged, he pulled a full-on enabling law moment and crushed it with an intolerant fury that stunned even his sharpest critics. He treated his own citizens like dirt, bypassed the Constitution, and revealed he has the instincts of a thug. He treats the people of Canada like they exist to do his bidding, when of course the reverse is true. He is there to do their bidding. Instead, he acts like some sort of god emperor, passing down his diktats from on high and responding with a fury and criminality to any sort of challenge. All the protesters wanted was freedom, but that concept is anathema to this convicted control freak like Trudeau. And this man's control freakery, addiction to fashionable causes, and mania for virtue signalling appear to have no limits. In July, he arbitrarily ordered farmers to reduce nitrogen fertiliser emissions by 30%, a move that could virtually destroy Canadian agriculture. He's currently rolling out plans to impose a new digital ID system on Canadian citizens. The Canadian economy is crumbling under Trudeau's over-egged reaction to the pandemic, and unemployment is soaring. But in defiance of this, Trudeau has arbitrarily proposed that Canada takes in 400,000 new immigrants every year. His environmental grandstanding means that Trudeau recently handed a $5.2 billion bailout to the Muskrat Falls hydroelectric project in Newfoundland, a work of vanity. This project should never have been started, and it will be an unprofitable money pit even if it ever gets finished. But then Trudeau also pledged $2.65 billion to fight climate change at the Commonwealth Leaders Summit, even though Canada's massive wetlands, farmlands and vast forests act as a carbon sink. Perhaps he should direct attention to China instead. But the reality is that Trudeau deliberately delayed Canada's vaccine rollout because he'd signed a secret deal with China for vaccines that they later reneged on. Trudeau then blamed the Canadian people for the COVID spread that he was responsible for. We shouldn't be surprised at these sort of inconsistencies. Here, after all, is a man who continually lectures everyone about climate change, while making frequent use of private jets for his elaborate family holidays. And he's also the man who obsequiously pandered to PLM, despite a long and troubling history of blackface. Canada is now facing a massive energy crisis, but it was Trudeau who put a stop to fracking in Canada and who imposed draconian regulations and taxes on oil from Alberta, Newfoundland and Saskatchewan, but not on oil from Saudi Arabia. Trudeau also addressed the problem of high incarceration levels of Indigenous and black communities in Canada, but his solution was to simply reduce their sentences. This on top of the legislation that propelled Jordan Peterson to prominence, that of compelled speech. It's one thing to ban speech, and that's vile enough. But to compel people to comply with particular thoughts, words and ideals is a new low. Outside of the regimes of Mao and Pol Pot, it's difficult to think of a comparable case. Trudeau also attempted to hand a completely unnecessary billion-dollar contract to WE Charity, but only after his mother and brother had both received $300,000 from the charity for speaking gigs. Perhaps Trudeau's record of electoral success is because of how the CBC pumps out pro-regime propaganda, all after considerable remuneration from the state. Either that, or you'd have to assume the majority of Canadians are simply idiots, easily gulled simpletons swayed by the empty rhetoric of an immaculately dressed, handsome charlatan with beautifully groomed locks. But his looks are a superficial veneer, as is his charm. Scratch the surface and you have a nasty, conformist, and astoundingly thick phony. One puffed up on hubris, who arrogantly believes in his own manifest destiny, and has nothing but contempt for the seething masses who see through his superficial charms. I expect history to judge Trudeau harshly, and I hope Canadians do the same thing at the ballot box at the very next opportunity. If you'd like to support this channel, please like, subscribe, and think about buying my books. They're called The Tyranny of the Left, and they go into topics like this in much greater detail. They're available on the links below. Please do feel free to pick them up and let me know what you think. Thank you.